The original wooden downeasters were hard workers, but sailing ships made from iron and steel were larger, more durable, and, at the turn of the century, readily available on the world market. The association bought its first iron ship, the Euterpe, in January of 1901. Soon, there would be more.
The Alaska Packers fleet was one of the largest sailing ship fleets in America, and probably the very largest that included the kind of ships they had, square rig ships.
What they used to say, they had the biggest privately owned sailing fleet in the world, privately owned.
As the Packers shopped for bigger and better vessels, a fleet of iron and steel ships, several of them British-built, had fetched up in a port of convenience, Honolulu. Then as now, foreign-built hulls were barred from U.S. commercial fisheries in the coastwise trade. But the 1898 annexation of Hawaii and a subsequent act of Congress changed the rules. Soon, a more imposing fleet lined the wharves at Fort Basin.
There were 4 particular ships that came out of one fleet in Ireland, in Belfast, called the Irish Stars, owned by J.P. Corey. They were the Star of Bengal, the Star of Russia, the Star of France, and the Star of Italy.
The Packers liked the Corey Star prefix and began naming all of their sailing ships after the fashion of the Irish vessels. The Euterpe became the Star of India. The Balclutha became the Star of Alaska. The Himalaya became the Star of Peru. The Coalinga became the Star of Chile, and the Abbey Palmer became the Star of England. The Great Star Fleet was born.
So eventually 19 iron and steel sailing ships replaced the old wooden ships, and these ships were more easily convertible to carrying cannery hands, larger cargoes of supplies, and larger packs coming back from Alaska at the end of the season.
To crew the Star Fleet and another 10 to 15 sailing vessels under charter, the APA employed more than 7,000 men. Its vessels packed 75,000 tons of cargo annually. Every April, the ships were loaded with coal to fuel the canneries, with tin to make the cans, with lumber to construct cannery buildings and wharfs, with box shooks to make the salmon cases, and with a summer's worth of provisions. Once the stores were loaded in Alameda, the vessels were towed to San Francisco, where crews representing the far corners of the globe signed on for the 2,500-mile trip north.
The masters of these ships were largely all Scandinavian. There were some Germans.
Italians and Scandinavians signed on as sailors and fishermen. In the spring, they helped rig the ships and sail them north. After the fishing and canning were finished in the fall, they loaded the holds with a salmon pack and sailed the ships home. As compensation, they received run money, $75 for the run north, paid after the vessel had reached Alaska, and $75 more for the return voyage, paid at the dock in Alameda.
And they paid them in runs, I was told, to keep them from deserting.
Communication aboard the polyglot vessels was a challenge. Niceties like proper names were often dispensed with.
Nobody knew what their first names were. Sometimes they didn't know what their last names were. They just went by a handle. King Salmon Pete. Daylight Jack was Captain Soline, who had the Star of Italy for many years. I met him in 1943 in Alameda. I met King Salmon Pete in his last years when he was way up in his 80s, living in Alameda. I met Captain Halverson walking up and down the office of the old Alaska Packers office over at 111 California Street. He looked like the San Francisco Mafia. Felt hat squashed down over his head, overcoat. A real gruff guy, but what a man he was, and what a character, and what a driver of men he was on that ship, Balclutha, with the Star of Alaska.
Cannery crews for APA plants throughout the Pacific Northwest and Alaska were supplied by Chinese labor contractors. who negotiated with the canneries on behalf of the men. The company transported the Chinese crew to and from the cannery, provided a bunkhouse, fuel, water, and salt. The contractor fed them and furnished a cook and a Chinese boss or foreman, as well as the whiskey and opium that kept them docile. Art James went to work at the APA cannery on the Semiahmoo Spit in 1918.
Every year we had Chinamen up there. They were contracted from Oregon. The China boss would contract so many, about 50 or 60 of them, to come up for the summer, you see, and he took care of them. See? And they had their own living quarters, see? A large 3-story building, and they had their own cook and all that.
By 1904, not only Chinese but Japanese were working in the canneries. Soon the labor contract became known as the Oriental Contract, and the crews became mixtures of Filipinos, Japanese, Puerto Ricans, Chinese, and Mexicans.
Now the night was darkly starlit, and the wind came weaving in. Like a poor lonesome sailor man, cast upon the sand, up the old Embarcadero and down to port again. We're leaving San Francisco in the morning.
On departure day, the men gathered on the docks of San Francisco. It was a festive occasion. The Italians arrived with jugs of wine, and the Scandinavians brought moonshine.
Say goodbye to dear old
Wives and sweethearts came to bid their men farewell. President Fortman was always on hand. There were tears and laughter.
But we're leaving San Francisco in the morning.
Aboard ship, the carpenters secured the anchors, locked the windlass, plugged the hawse pipes, and fired up the donkey engine. It was important to have the donkey engine ready to handle the heavy work of raising sail, in case the men were too drunk or too seasick.
Steal the heart of those who steal away to sea, for a heart that loves the ocean's been forlorn eternally, and we're leaving San Francisco in the morning.
The carpenters also busied themselves building additional bunks and galleys for the cannery hands.
You have to remember that these ships were outfitted to carry anywhere from 70 to way over 100 people. They had to have bunks for them, they had to have cooking facilities, they had to have sanitary facilities, they had to have a large water supply. They didn't need oil because they were sailing.
The voyage to Alaska was a difficult journey, through waters often shrouded in fog and lashed by storms. Sometimes the ships took a coastwise route, calling on Puget Sound ports for lumber and coal, or ferrying supplies to and from the APA canneries at Point Roberts and Semiahmoo. Bert Isaacson remembers their visits.
But I remember the Star of Lapland came in here lots of times. They'd load up supplies going north, then they'd bring fish coming back.
Well, they came in every summer ahead of the canning season, bringing up stuff that we needed, you see.
Other ships bound for Alaska took the direct route through open ocean. For roughly a month, they beat northward against the westerly wind. At sea, the races were kept largely separate.
The races were divided, and for a good reason. Lifestyles were considerably different. The Chinese cannery hands were confined to the Chinese quarters in the 'tween deck, generally in the 'tween deck, which is the next deck down from the main deck, the weather deck.
That reporter you told me about was right when he said it was a tough proposition to go to Alaska in the China gang. We had about 50 Chinamen and about 45 Mexicans on the ship we went up on. They all stayed together in a little cubby hole in the forward part of the ship. Their meals, consisting of beans and rice, a little dry bread and tea, was cooked up on deck, and each man had his own tin plate and knife and fork, and came up on deck at mealtime and got his rations of a big pot to eat it wherever he could find a place on deck, no matter what the weather is, snow, rain, or sunshine, and each man washed his plate of a tub of seawater they had for that purpose.
The Italians and the Scandinavians generally stayed in the old customary forecastles. the deck houses, and maybe some of the after quarters. The diets were different. You can't feed Europeans a Chinese diet, and the Chinese wouldn't eat a European diet. Yes, the lifestyle was different, and sad to say, the Chinese were treated pretty much as second-class citizens.
Tradition says that in case the ship was sinking at sea, the China gang would be locked down in the hold, or where they stay, and let go down with the ship without any chance
closer
to
to
sail.
shore and anchored for the summer. In late June or early July, the fishing began. Propelled by sails and heavy oars, flotillas of Columbia River boats dispersed over the fishing grounds. The huge red salmon runs lasted for only 2 or 3 weeks, and the harvest was intense.
The fishermen only got small sailboats, about 25 feet in length, and fish with a gill net, 2 men to a boat. Do their cooking right on the boat. Not allowed to come ashore except for provisions. Got to stay out there in any kind of weather. Believe me, they earn every dollar they get. Axel Widerstrom.
They would come into the tenders up in Alaska, barely afloat, and occasionally not afloat. And the guys lived out on the boats for days on end. The tugs would tow them out to the fishing grounds, long strings of these sailboats, cut them loose, and they'd go out and do their fishing. And the guys would live out here in these, underneath these little canopies with a little Swede stove and a box of groceries that they'd picked up from the cannery, and that's the way they lived, damp and cold. But they were making money hand over fist.
They said when they come home in the end closing period, they're all black from their little stove and the hard life.
The sailboats offloaded their catches at tally scows, where the fish were counted so that each fisherman could be paid according to his production.
Of course, there's a lot of crooked work about that, like everything else there. For instance, some of them pay the tallyman some percentage of how much overcount he gives them. So if you see there's many a scow load comes in which is reported by the tallyman to have about 80 or 90,000 fish, but in reality they only have 70,000 or less, and each fisherman gets 6 cents apiece for his season's catch, so the company is cheated out of thousands of dollars every year that way. But nobody is worrying about the company, as they get more fish than they can handle there anyhow. Such is life in the far north. I hope I never have to go up there again.
In other regions, the harvest was conducted primarily with traps. In the shallows of Puget Sound, the packers built pile traps.
Many, many fish traps were out here in the bay. My grandfather's logbook, when he was superintendent, I counted about 200 fish traps, pile traps, out here in the bay and in other parts of the upper Puget Sound.
The traps fished 24 hours a day. To protect their investments, the canneries found it necessary to have them watched round the clock.
There was always a watchman, usually 2 of them, on these traps. Right? They were quartered right there. They had a little house on the top of the trap, and they lived right there. And some of the watchmen got in the habit of selling a few fish at night. So they had to send out a special boat usually to check them guys.
Another season of labor on the processing lines of the APA's Wrangell cannery had ended. The Star of Bengal rested at the dock, her hold bulging with 52,000 cases of canned salmon, valued at $216,000. On board were 138 sailors and cannery hands. A pair of small steamers, the Hattie Gage and the Kayak, took the ship's 6-inch hemp lines in tow. The 3-vessel flotilla headed westward, bound for open water. The weather was calm as they left the dock, but the wind and seas grew increasingly violent.